All around the world, there are strange reports of man-like canine beasts. They go by many names: shapeshifters, beasts, dogmen, and Manwolf. Several years ago, the YouTube personality How to Hunt discussed an alleged photograph that had been emailed to him, which the supposed photographer claimed was of a dogman or manwolf. The photograph has long since been proven a hoax, and yet still makes its rounds in the many online circles. Why do these hoaxes continue to fool thousands of people?
Working on Cryptid Campfire over the past 5 years, I've come across a lot of different cryptid cases. In fact, I've covered a lot of different cryptozoological cases. And one of the interesting things I've come across is that a lot of them are based off of like one sighting or two sightings, something like that. And I would actually classify a lot of cryptids as cases of folklore. Lots of things are lumped into the modern definition of cryptid or cryptozoology. Things like the snallygaster, the hodag, the jackalope. Those are all very clearly hoaxed, faked stories, but people hold on to them. And you know, there's fun in that, in the folklore element of this, but I think the problem is you have some people who take cryptozoology seriously and some people who view cryptozoology as a kind of study of folklore. There isn't a strong delineation between the two. And so, frustrating for anyone who tries to take this seriously. It's frustrating that folklore gets lumped into this so often, and especially the rise of the internet with things like creepypastas. You know, people are trying to say Slender Man's a cryptid nowadays, and thankfully, you know, keyboard warriors have kept them away from that. But very, very few cryptozoological cases seem to be based on actual eyewitness testimony that's reliable and is repeated throughout history. You know, things like Sasquatch, you know, there's a historical record for, and then continued everyday sightings. But things like the snallygaster was a few reported like April Fool's Day newspaper things, and folklore spread by whiskey moonshiners during the Prohibition days. Or there's the roadside attraction type thing, which is like the hodag, which I guess I wouldn't call it a roadside attraction, but it was like a curiosity and people were charged money to go see this. So there's a lot of that in terms of cryptozoology.
There is a prevailing phenomenon in the Manwolf evidence-based community that seems to just keep blooming and blooming as time goes on, and it's become a nigh unstoppable force. The channel, The Facts by How to Hunt, was started up by Steve Isdall, and at first was kind of just a hunting advice and hunting stories series that he posted to YouTube, but eventually he dipped his fingers a lot into things like Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Dogman, and other unexplained wilderness phenomenon. And over the years, he's done a lot of videos on alleged photographs of these unidentified species. One particular video, which was uploaded to his channel many months ago, covered an alleged photo that was emailed to him by a Michelle Furch, who included in her email that this was a photograph she believed could have been a dogman. Now, Steve is very open-ended in his videos, and the problem there is that even though there's nothing wrong with being open-ended in general, when there is evidence to disprove a story right at your fingertips, it sometimes isn't due diligence to just be open-ended. You need to investigate if you're going to present what you present as the facts. The photograph that he was sent is this image that shows what is, a werewolf-like creature, which seems to be kneeling on the ground, perhaps eating something or attending to something in front of this kind of spooky-looking dark wilderness. And so many versions of this photograph exist, and it is so clearly an artistic illustration. The way that the lines move, the way that the borders work, the way that the photograph is detailed, it's just not what you'd see in any kind of real-life 3D photograph. It is a 2D artistic rendition. Some of the oldest versions of this image can actually be found from upwards of over 10 years ago on sites like 4chan, but most of the popular versions can be found on places like DeviantArt and other art websites. Again, very clearly an artistic representation. But because this has been perpetuated as an unexplained photo, that's the traction that it gained. Even when researchers like Ryan Paul Tremblay, who I have talked to about hoaxes before, outed it very clearly as a hoax, it just didn't gain the same amount of traction. And so most people still regard this disproven photo as some kind of evidence for manwolves. And it's a force that the Manwolf Files as a series was actually conceived of to combat. That is something called the reiteration effect. The reiteration effect is a psychological phenomenon in which exposure to an idea makes the perception of that idea a favorable one towards the idea, even if the idea is false or could be proven false later, and the information stating or proving that it's false gains less traction than that initial idea. Think of it almost like a news cycle, in a way. Let's say that you're a fan of a particular NASCAR driver, and he's won championship after championship after championship, and it made all the headlines in the country for 10 straight years. Now let's say in the 10 years following that he loses more often, but the people who he loses to, being smaller names, gain less of those headline spaces, gain less traction in the news, and you don't really hear about them. In your head, he is still perceived as this unbeatable champion, even though he hasn't been that in 10 years. It's the same kind of phenomenon. And unfortunately, hoaxes in the Manwolf evidence base really get a lot of traction before they're proven to be hoaxes. We're going to cover a few other ones too.
Hoaxes are one of, if not the biggest challenge that we face in the dogman research field today. These are typically perpetuated through alleged photos of either dogmen creatures themselves or footprints or claw marks, and they pop up very, very frequently on Facebook groups and Reddit threads, and even on Instagram and X and Threads and other social media platforms. These photos are very easy to circulate, they pick up traction very, very fast, and they will stick around for years, sometimes, as purported dogman evidence. And like other cases that we've looked at, they will often go away, fall out of the public eye, and then come back a few months or a few years later, and then the process starts all over again. Sometimes these are stills taken from movies, perhaps with filters applied to make them look more authentic. Very often what we're seeing now, though, are AI-generated images that are purported to be from security cameras or trail cameras. And when you look at them, it's not too hard to figure out that something doesn't quite look right. But that doesn't stop these pictures from gaining traction very, very quickly and spreading around the community as purported legitimate evidence. The same applies to videos, and with AI technology branching into video generation more and more, it is highly unlikely that we'll see the end of this anytime soon.
Ryan Paul Tremblay is actually a crux in this conversation because I also had a talk with him on my YouTube channel, Crash Course Cryptozoology, a few years ago, talking about what was called the CCTV Dogman image, which turned out to be a hoax that was created from concept art for the film Cursed.
What happened was somebody sent me the Dogman photo.
Right.
And I had seen it circulate a number of times, and I'm going, I think that's fake. I think it's fake. Then I was looking at the picture of the Dogman in the photo, and I happened to be watching that movie Cursed, right? And so I was like, wait a minute, is that the same werewolf? So I did a Google image search, and I found that stock photo that I showed you. I'm going, wait a minute, that's the same exact Dogman or werewolf from that photo.
Yeah, right. Which was really kind of, I feel like that photo is one that is so interesting to so many people because it looks so weird. Not even necessarily in like a, oh, it looks fake sense. It's like, wow, I've never seen a picture of a werewolf where it's like leaning in a weird way or standing like that or anything like that. What did you...
Well, the picture that I found, that was a life-size stand-up.
Right.
The werewolf, so I'm going, wait a minute, it's the same exact thing. And the original stand-up of the statue, if you want to call it that, it actually had a base. It had a wooden base.
Oh, did it really?
Yeah, so if you look at that photo, you can see where the wooden base is in the photo.
That's interesting. That's
you see
really
the dark
interesting.
line where the shadow is, where that base ends.
Oh, so I mean, that's kind of the smoke and gun right there in a lot of ways, isn't it? With just the presence of what would appear to be a wooden base in the photo.
Right.
Yeah, wow, that's pretty
So, I
distinct.
wouldn't want to burst bubbles, but when you see a fake, you gotta call it fake.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other examples of the hoaxes that perpetuate themselves throughout the Dogman community are things like what we call the Sprinter, which was a photograph that the YouTube channel NVTV perpetuated. NVTV being known for a lot of this kind of research-less behavior, let's call it. And it couldn't be any more clear that the Sprinter photo is an edited version of a photo with this stock werewolf put into the photo. It's the same image. Another subject that I've covered not only on my YouTube channel, but also in the first season of the Manwolf Files, is the on-away photograph. We actually spoke with the person who was able to find just a 1 in a million, well, more like 1 in several billion, picture that proved that this was a hoax. Mathematically speaking, for these two images to match was essentially a negative mathematical possibility. You even have this same phenomenon, as it pertains to Dogman and Manwolves actually, spreading outward into further online territory. One example being a subject that the YouTuber Demuted covered about a sort of fictional ARG story. For those who are unaware, an ARG is a kind of story, a fictional story, told through the medium of something convincing, like maybe a forum thread or a YouTube video series that is portrayed as real even though the story is fictional. There's this photo that floated around from this particular series that, again, Demuted on YouTube covered, that was actually paraded as a Dogman photo for quite some time.
I hope I'm pronouncing that right. For the ease of this video, I'll just be referring to them as Arch going forward. We'll definitely talk about what Arch does outside of this thread later, but let's start with the first post. Our dog has been barking and scratching up our back door every night. He's been doing this for days, so I sat with him last night to find the issue. I snapped a flash pic of the back door when he barked and captured this. Be very careful outside, because this does not look normal. Attached is the first image of the thread, showing this. Its eyes are reflected against the light shining, and its face seems leathery, with a mane or fur of feathers surrounding it. With its long, pointed snout and eyes that seem to stare directly at the cameraman, we get a real sense of scale. Although its body seems to disappear into the dark just outside the light's glow, we can make out that it's absolutely huge. Arch is right. This doesn't look normal at all. In the immediate follow-up, Arch writes, "Additionally, whatever it was fled after I photographed it. We haven't seen the animal since then. I live in the Chicagoland suburbs, so that's where you should beware of this thing. Nobody can identify it, and my family and I are frankly afraid to go outside now. Look out." So far, this thing has only appeared once and hasn't caused much trouble, other than freak Arch out. But the next post comes the following day. Update on this animal. I'm having a garage sale and one of my neighbors came over with his kids. I talked to them about the weird animal and they have actually seen it too. One of the kids made this drawing depicting the animal. Cut the artist some slack, he's only 6. We're shown a drawing of the monster, what the mentioned kid calls Big Bird. This drawing actually tells us something new though. That being that it looks like there's 2 of them. One, the larger monster we saw the previous night, and one smaller one. Also among the bird and the bunny are these 2 blue figures who could be birds or something else entirely. It's unclear yet. It's here that Arch makes a decision to try to investigate a little further and try and capture a recording of it. In his next post, he provides a video and a photograph. In the video, all is dark, but something can be heard.
There are so many of these that float around the community, and we made the Manwolf File series to combat this problem. It's such a prevalent issue, and the biggest shame is that there are people who genuinely believe that they've experienced something unexplainable in the Manwolf sphere. But so many stories that are actually interesting, that give us real data about this phenomenon, that give us interesting stories that we can actually pursue to some extent, are buried by blatant hoaxes that people just don't take the responsibility to seek out.
Are they intentional hoaxes? Some of them, the Hodag was an intentional hoax, but that came out. And certain aspects of other stories, like the surgeon's photograph being a hoax, is one. and that happened back in 1933. But there are reports of the Loch Ness Monster, and that's been visible. Some reports of Champ have been hoaxed. So, and obviously Sasquatch has its fair share of hoaxes as well, but that doesn't mean that there isn't something there.
I guess in a way, this episode is kind of a tribute to the very cause for this series, which is we need to do better in researching this, because until we really clean out the closet here, we're not going to get to the bottom of anything.